Welcome to the Evolving Man podcast. My name is Alan DeMonso, and I'm the founder of The Awakened Man and your host today. As we continue in 2021's theme of reclaim, retool, respond, we come into the month of May and we look to take another step in sowing seeds for that plentiful harvest that we look to reap at the end of this year. So to do that, reminder, our second quarter is all about ignition, igniting our passion, our purpose, and our power. But before we get into that, I'd like to encourage you to check out our members section where you'll find our brotherhood, the Band of Brothers. This is our community of strong, resilient men, where each man is there not just to see himself grow, but to help his brothers grow as well. And if you're really interested in raising the level of how you show up in the world, then I encourage you to rise up and participate in our Hero's Quest. It's a 90-day challenge that's guaranteed to improve at least one facet of your life. And so all of this can be found at members, that's plural, members.theawakenedman.net. With that being said, let's get on with today's show.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life. Many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Luckily, throughout history, there exists a few good men we can look to for guidance. Strong, confident, driven. Men who weren't afraid to face the greatest tyrant they've ever known, their minds. Forged in the fire of their shadows, these men knew who they were at their core, solid in their convictions, owners of their reality, men of action, strength, and character, masters of their destiny. Today's man is no different. The hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve them or the world. There's never been a better time than today for men to stand up and claim their stake. It's time to reconnect to your life purpose, evolving into husbands and fathers our wives and children deserve, becoming masters of our life and the leaders of our homes and community. Ever evolving, today's man is assured he is aligned for greatness. Welcome to the movement. Stay strong, my brother.
Well, welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited about today's podcast. And, as we normally get started in the podcast, I'd like to have a couple of questions. And so if you don't mind, I'm just going to have a quick peek at them here. The first question I have for you today is, do you have a resilient mindset? And if you could learn a skill to improve your resiliency, would that be something of interest for you? Well, if you said yes to either one of these two questions, I'm telling you guys, we're going to have a great podcast today. So joining me today is a HeartMath Certified Trainer, a safety professional who cut her teeth in resilience training by lining up her passions and purpose and pursuing non-typical roles as an RCMP constable, a construction crew chief, a foreman, a hockey player, motocross racer. Mike has accomplished all of this while challenging stereotypes, battling sexism, and overcoming a learning disability. Please help me welcome my very special guest, Sharon Inkster. Welcome to the show, Sharon.
Thanks, Elaine. Thanks for having me on. It really means a lot to me to be part of your podcast lineup and have the opportunity to connect with your Awakened Man listeners. I really admire your group's mission, and I line right up with it.
Right on. Thank you so much. I've given our listeners a bit of a sneak peek about what your background is in preparing for today's talk, but I'd really like for the listeners to understand your personal journey. And so I'll venture a guess that what you've lived in your life, it's going to resonate with these folks. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your story?
Okay, well, let's start off by digging into how our resilience really affects our ability to ignite that passion, purpose, and the power. So resilience is really about our energetic capacity to deal with life's challenges. And it's very helpful to think of our resilience in the context of capacity and how much energy we have in an inner battery. So what I mean by that is that we humans were really just energy beings. And we're constantly expending and renewing that energy. So life's challenges or stress really are energy expenditure, and our passions help us renew that energy. And aligning our behaviors with our purpose really makes us very powerful and energy efficient people. So the purpose of my sharing the story of resilience today is that I'm hoping that it just brings to light the power that we all have within us to take charge of our own health, to own our behaviors, and to create environments where everyone flourishes around us. So throughout the story, I'm going to provide some examples of where, my sort of lack of awareness around energy expenditure affected my resilience, manifested in deteriorating health and performance, and affected those closest to me, affected, my really being able to show up in the world. And also woven through the story are instances of just unwavering confidence in my intuition. And we're going to talk a little bit about how our intuition shows up in our resiliency as well. So the beauty is that we all have the ability to intelligently regulate our energy expenditure and access that intuitive guidance to be the best versions of us and show up for the greater good of all involved, show up in the service of that. So it's just a matter of building a few skills and a little bit of awareness.
Right on. Excellent. That sounds outstanding. So listen, there were a couple of interactions that really started you on your journey early in life, wasn't there? Why don't you tell us a little bit about those interactions and how that really started you on this path?
Yeah. So both of these interactions, oddly enough, happened when I was about 8 years old. And that's when we solidify our beliefs and thoughts about life. We start to make our own beliefs and thoughts really take root and think about things as individuals instead of just what our environment has so far taught us, our parents and grandparents and how we grew up. So the first interaction or the first instance was for some reason we were discussing things, or I was always aware of how stressed out my parents were. And I just asked my mom one day, I'm like, why did you have 3 kids? I'm a very literal and authentic person, even at a young age. And she said, well, your father wanted a son. You were born, so we tried again. And I was just like, oh, okay, so not good enough. And so she didn't know it at the time, but that's what I felt, right? And then the second one came along when I was diagnosed with dyslexia, and that's a learning disability for those that don't know. It's really just a part of my brain that it just has trouble recognizing the sequence of things. So things like spelling and math, really hard to grasp with typical learning methods, that they had back when I was a kid. So, but dyslexia really, it meant that I was different again, and it affected the way, I was able to perform in the current learning system in school. And once again, don't fit in and not good enough was the message that I'd heard. So, so growing up in the 80s where, there was some very strong societal constructs about how, women and men should behave. And having that feeling of being not good enough as a female really just lit up a bunch of things in my life that I had really, I think, struggled with. So for me, it really seemed like all the things that I loved doing, which were, playing sports, riding motorcycles, fixing things, getting dirty, play fighting, labor work, all of those things were things that I wasn't, shouldn't be doing as a female, so, and that created a lot of tension, in my family relationships and at large in the community that I grew up in, because I was sort of a disruptor at the time. And so that really made me wish many times when I was a young person that I just didn't want to be like, I wish I wasn't born. I couldn't figure out, first of all, why my parents had 3 kids and I popped along and, there I was, now I have to deal with this life, right? Which a lot of people go through. So life was frustrating for me because I just didn't fit in. And, a really good example of how the tension, manifested in my family was that my father really liked to go to auctions when I was a kid. And I'd like to tag along because there was usually a row of dirt bikes that I could go and check out, right? And so my love for dirt bikes started when I was about 3 years old. My grandpa had a Goldwing, and when I would go visit my grandparents, I would literally just sit on the step and stare at this bike. I just loved it. And so my grandpa would come out and he'd fire it up and ask me to go for a ride, and I'd run away because I didn't like the noise. but I could just sit there and stare at it. So I mean, I really loved motorcycles. It started from a young age that they were in my blood. And so anyways, getting back to these auctions, one day I went to an auction with my dad and I found a bike that I really, really wanted. And I just pestered the heck out of him to bid on it. And he got so fed up with me. He said, little girls don't ride motorcycles.
Wow.
And he said, you're going to get hurt. So
Wow.
as you can imagine.
Yeah, I know. I just want to, that's just such an important point. I really want to just spend a minute or two thinking about this. And we think as fathers that we're protecting our daughters by making comments like that, or pigeonholing them or stereotyping them into a position where they shouldn't do that. Because I bet you, if you were a boy, he wouldn't have said that. He probably would have bought it. Now, I don't know your dad, don't know him at all, but my gut says that, probably that's what would have went down. And it's unfortunate. And today, our realization as awakened men is that, why shouldn't you, as a little girl, enjoy a motorcycle bike? You're going to do the same training. You're going to provide the same safety features with that, regardless of whether it's a girl or a boy on it. So I think it's so important that as men, we need to understand the things that we think that we're protecting our daughters from, we're actually probably doing more harm. So I just needed to jump in there and just touch on that. So how did you feel about all that? Like, how did that, hear your dad, your mom's already kind of like, yeah, your dad really wanted a boy, and here comes another girl, and so we're going to try again. And almost dismissive. Again, I don't know your mom at all. And then your dad's saying, hey, you're a girl, you're not a boy, you shouldn't be on a bike. So how's this making you feel about life in general?
So at that point, it just absolutely crushed my soul. Like, I really resented being a female, being a girl so much in my young life. And I would try to hide it in things that I'd go into, quite literally. Like when I would do things, people wouldn't know if I had equipment on, they wouldn't know it was a girl. They would think it was a boy. Because I had just, I really shucked everything that there was about being female and pushed it away out of my life, because to me, it was a weakness. It didn't serve me, didn't serve my purpose, didn't serve my power. It didn't light me up inside, doing Barbies and hair. Nope. So yeah, it really, really, made me think differently about the world and about, what my place was in it. Yeah,
absolutely. Right. And so you've used a really great word that you talked about. You considered yourself a disruptor, right? And growing up, you definitely were, as you were challenging the stereotypes of what was going on there. But what did this have for an effect for you in your community and the people around you?
Well, it sort of it put everyone on edge, to be kind of exact, and it showed up in different ways, right? So I think my family was always just hoping that one day I'd turn into a little girl, like to be a little, like I don't know how you say this, like a more typical girl. She'll grow out of being a tomboy. And that was what I heard a lot. And I just thought, I don't think so. So to give you an idea how it affected my community, or how it really, influenced my community, is that, so I wanted to play hockey so bad when I was a kid. And again, I started pestering my parents, because my friends who were boys, they're like, you're a good athlete, you can come play hockey, you should come play. Right. And so I pestered the heck out of them. And finally, when I was 12 years old, that they let me play. But what happened was, with a late start, it meant that I had to learn that game at an accelerated pace. And because of my news of playing hockey was not well received with some of the other people in the community, the parents of the other kids on the team, it really, to me, it meant that I needed to get it right. I needed to get it right the first time, because I knew that every time I was out there, my performance was being critiqued. And when I would get off the ice, people would come talk to me, you got to do this, you got to do that. And so I knew that the eyes were on me, and I was really worried about being kicked off the team, not being able to play, right? So it just puts a ton of extra pressure on a kid to not only learn the game, but, to make your community proud and to show that you can play. So A lot of those parents really thought that playing with a girl at the time would have disrupted their little boy somehow. And it, put a lot of pressure on my mom. So there was a lot of tension. Mom's trying to support me, and my dad too. Okay, let's get her in there. We're gonna go all the way with this. But it also caused them a little bit of tension and stress. So by the time I hit my second year of hockey, I was into Pee Wee, which meant it was time for contact already. And our town, I grew up in a really small farming town, and we just didn't have enough players to field a whole team in Pee Wee. So we had to join up with another town. And so here I am again. I'm in my second year of hockey, going to meet a bunch of new people who don't know me, and some who don't want me there, and meet a bunch of new players and stuff to get along with and be teammates with. That some didn't want me there again, right? They really doubted my ability to play. So I can remember specifically, as a young player, one time in my life where, we were starting to learn how to hit, and I was a pretty solid kid. I always was, not great big, but solid. And so we were learning how to hit one day and take a hit, and I had defended a hit, just so well that the other kid fell on his ass, and then he ended up having a big tantrum, and saying that I cross-checked him, and it really got ugly, and I felt bad. I didn't want to hurt anybody, but I'm there to learn, so I put all in, right? And so anyways, that really pissed off his father, because his father was one of those ones that was pretty skeptical about my being there in the first place, and that created a lot of tension again for my parents. But one day, this guy really made it known to me what he thought of me in front of everyone on the team as we were coming off the ice after a big game. We had made it into the provincial championships, and I remember this because I was sat for most of that game, without any real reason. I just, was kind of wondering why I would get second shifted all the time. And meanwhile, I'm watching this guy's kid who had missed a couple of pivotal plays in the game. And they ended up scoring, I was kind of like, okay, I guess it doesn't matter if I sit here. So we're walking off the ice after the game, and this guy's dad was standing right at the door, and he looked me right in the eye and he said, "You're the reason we lost this game." And so again, I'm just like, wow, okay. And I knew, even though this came from, someone who was a supposed authority figure,
right.
And I was brought up to respect my elders. I was brought up to respect people in general, and, but in my heart, I knew this guy was wrong. And I can tell I'm getting emotional about it still. So,
sure.
But I knew he was wrong, and it just really, really pissed me off. And so I made sure that I looked him in the eye after I got dressed and out of the room. I looked him in the eye. I didn't say anything because at the time that would have been disrespectful. I was trying to respect my position as a young kid. But I just looked him in the eye and made sure he knew that I knew he was wrong. And, I was a 13-year-old kid who wanted to play hockey for the love of the game.
Yeah.
I didn't consider my gender going in. It just everyone else did. So, but anyways, I kept playing hockey, despite being told no, despite all the difficulties, despite having to change in closets and in broom closets on a stool with a chunk of skate mat if I was lucky. But I kept playing hockey, eventually made it onto some elite teams, had a lot of fun. I was scouted for the national women's team at one point. And unfortunately, I couldn't go much further with hockey because of a knee injury. But at the same time, the skills that I gained in hockey, the social skills, the confidence, all of that really made a huge difference in my life. And it's given me tremendous benefits. So just still sticking at it and going for it really made a huge difference in my life.
Absolutely. I'm listening to you tell the hockey story there, and I'm getting pissed off, right? I'm sitting there, thinking, geez, whiz, like how short-sighted we can be to do that. And typical, back in the 80s, we were, I'm a child of the 80s, so I can think of how we treated like as young adults, 17, 18, 19-year-old boys. Still, we're not men, we're still boys at that age. I don't think men really become men until we get into our mid to late 20s. At least I'll say that. I think even at 30, some of us are still struggling. but just how with the commentary and the derogatory comments that we would make about women in general. And I just think that what you've battled through and the resilience you've shown already up to 13 years of age, having, authority figures, fathers and mothers, and not being supported. So those weren't the only stereotypes though that you were battling, right? So tell us a little bit more about some of the other things that you had to deal with that was all along this path that was building your resilience.
Yeah. So the other one, the big thing in my life was that diagnosis of dyslexia. So it really meant that, again, I didn't belong and I wasn't good enough for the school system. And so this time the message came from my teachers. And it was really just because the methods that were being taught at the time and being developed weren't readily available to most educational institutions, right? I mean, it's just a sign of the times. And they teach more now to my style of learning than they ever did before, because they're starting to see advancements in it. So it really meant, though, that I was taken out of my classes and put into special classes sometimes. And at the time, I was a study subject. So, sometimes sometimes I felt like a specimen. Just leave me alone. And so for me, the difficulties came in the tensions that created was my parents really, they trying to support me, not sure how. A lot of times they just thought I was lazy and, just putting more time into sports because that's what I love doing and it was easy for me, than putting time on the books because it was not easy. And, no human being in this world will go gravitate towards something that, doesn't give them life, right? So with the dyslexia, teachers wanted to hold me back from entering junior high. And I begged them to let me pass because I knew there was something inside of me saying that I could learn. And so my intuition was saying, no, you're not going to take this diagnosis and let it, define who you are and your success in life. I knew school was important. I just needed to find out how to learn. And that came to me with intuition that I can't really explain.
Wow, that's crazy. You bring up such an important topic there that I just wanted to touch on a little bit. And none of us are immune to having dealt shitty crap cards to play with in life, right? And you're 13, 15 and around this stage now in life, and let's face it, you've got a really crappy hand dealt with you to you, and yet you're overcoming hurdle over hurdle. It's not you're building your resilience, yet you really haven't learned. Like as you're learning and using your intuition, you still haven't really learned how to handle that. So
no.
Tell us a little bit more about how you were dealing with playing the cards you were dealt with, and then how that evolved in your life.
Right. I mean, so sometimes the game works out to where your crappy hand still gets you the win, right? And that's just playing the game. So if it wasn't for my crappy hand, I would have never met the most amazing and influential person in my life. I met my mentor because of it. And she was teaching grade 7 at the time. And it's because she had the skills in learning development to teach the way my brain needed to learn. And so once I worked with her, it just was like a light bulb went on in my head, and my whole life transformed because now I was gaining confidence with education, not just sports. Now I had a little more rounding out of my abilities. And what she taught me was not only just how to learn, but she taught me, she instilled confidence. She taught me self-regulation skills back then, which were, very unheard of. And the most important part was she taught me the power of positivity. Mm-hmm. She would not give up on me. If I didn't get something, she just would not give up. And she would always draw out what we did right, whatever it was we were working on. We'd go, okay, what did you do right? Now let's build on that. And eventually, by focusing on what was positive in the situation, we built up some really great skills and really great confidence. And I just took off after that. So I went from being a cause for concern for teachers to being on the honor roll. And that was so important to me. I'll share this with you, that I had an opportunity in hockey to go play hockey in Germany. And it was after being on one of those elite teams, and we had a big tournament in Vancouver, and they came to the room and said, "Hey, you guys want to go to Germany? We're looking at you, and you." And I really thought about it. I'm like, you know what? No, because I'm on the honor roll, and that's really important to me. So I knew at that point that I wasn't going to be able to make a living at hockey, and I needed to be able to make a living as a human being with other skills. And so it was so important to me being on the honor roll and keeping that fire lit, that I, among other things, I said no. And, now that I look back at it, I'm like, you idiot. You could have gone pretty far in hockey, but it's just the way it was. But so getting back to that dyslexia and stuff, and just learning how to learn, and having that intuition, and, having those challenges get you in a place where you meet the right people, because in life, you always have to meet those right people. It's all about the people you meet and the situations that you pull through that, get you on your path, right? What's really funny is that, so all my educational endeavors, post-secondary, police academy, all that good stuff, I was able to graduate with honors. And the odd thing now, the funny thing is, because I really know math was still really tough for me, when I was going into post-secondary education, teachers would recommend me, they'd say, stay out of the sciences because you still need the math. But now what I share with people are concepts from, a science called neurocardiology. It really doesn't get much more complex when you think of sciences. And so, I mean, it's just how life works out, right? But it's sort of funny.
Well, you had such an incredible story so far, and we're just scratching the surface of what you've been through, really. And you're starting to develop a little bit of resiliency here, like you following some intuition. You just found a mentor, but really, how have these now set the foundation to help you really build resiliency?
So I guess it kind of starts out with the fact that I was really at a young age able to see the opportunity for growth and all the challenges. And a lot of times people don't see challenges as an opportunity to grow. And that growth mindset is part of building a resilient mindset. And so, as much as the challenge, took a lot of energy out of my life and made me doubt my confidence and my abilities, it also motivated me to figure out, okay, well, how do I accomplish this? Because we are wired for success. Human beings are wired for success. Mm-hmm. We just got to get tuned up with that wiring. So developing resilience is very much about being aware of how you spend your energy, your life's energy, your time, right? You can't get that back in life. You can get money back, but you cannot get your time or your energy. And so without really being aware of it, I spent a lot of my life's energy resenting both my gender and my learning disability, because they highlighted that fact that I don't fit in and I'm not good enough to do those things that I love to do, those things that light me up. And as we spoke of before, those things that light you up inside, that's how you renew energy. That's the only way, besides sleep, is utilizing those things to really renew your energy in your life. So but what I mean by that is I would work extra hard. If somebody said, you can't do that, and oh, by the way, you're female, so you don't really, belong here. I would just burn up tons of energy saying, yes, I can, and I'll show you how, right? Wow. But what I wasn't aware of is how much energy that I expended was really starting to draw down on my resilience capacity. And, you're not aware of it because at the time, you don't know these things, right? It really does take a little bit of research around, resiliency and developing that information and getting it out to people so that they can utilize it, right? Yeah. And back then it just wasn't there. So, I mean, not fitting into any typical stereotypes, on top of being different, I also have a personality that comes across as intimidating. And again, when you don't know these things, when you don't know how your personality interacts with other people's personalities, how you just kind of spend time doing damage control and burning energy, right? And so I really encourage anyone who's listening to do that inner work, to do the find your values, find those core values. understand your purpose. And you might be surprised that your purpose probably isn't complicated or complex. Like my purpose is really just to use my skills, abilities, knowledge, and experience to make other people, or to inspire other people, and in the hopes that their life challenges aren't so hard on them.
Right on.
So I tended to burn up a tremendous amount of energy on things that I wasn't really understanding. And with my personality, so I'm an ENTJ, if you've ever done any of that work on the Myers-Briggs scale, which just roughly translates to me being an action-oriented problem solver who thinks really big and leads decisively. And so
somebody told me the A stood for something else, but maybe that's because they're talking about me. But now I know better. That's good.
So the A can sometimes stand for me being an ass, but it doesn't. It just means I communicate assertively. But that really does rub some people the wrong way, because I just like to tackle the elephant, push it into the middle of the room and say, here's the elephant, let's deal with it, right? And some people are like, whoa, we don't do that here. So, and the odd thing is that my personality, we make up less than 1% of the world's population. And then being female, it's even less than that. Wow. And so when I'm trying to figure out why I don't fit in anywhere, once I understood where my personality kind of lies, I'm like, oh, okay, well, this sort of starts to make sense now. And so I burn up less energy trying to figure things like that out, right? Because I am who I am, and I cannot not be me. I tend to gravitate toward jobs and, careers and activities and things where I got to work extra hard to prove that I can do the job and to earn acceptance from my peers. So that's how I ended up in things, like crew chief in the oil patch, foreman at a granite plant, mill operator, RCMP constable, and then I got into underground mining and safety. And what I really learned was interesting is that a lot of my struggles weren't just because, I am who I am, and I'm trying to fit into places that aren't traditionally, female type roles, but I was also battling sexism at the time. But I wouldn't consider sexism when I pursue something. I wouldn't say, oh, Sharon, you're a girl. When you walk into that boardroom full of, seasoned mining professionals, you better just learn. You better just be quiet and learn and absorb. I never rolled that way. And people would call that out. They'd be like, how do you walk into that room and, and say your piece so confidently? Yeah. And I would be like, what do you mean?
Well, and it's so true, right? And so one of the things that I work on with the men and with the Awakened Man is we have a module I call it the Man Box, and it's really about dealing with our identity and how as men we can tend to be very sexist towards the women in our lives, and it can go as simple as the idioms that we use to express weakness, right? Like I can remember going back to my 80s days, right? If someone wasn't tough enough, we'd call them they were a pussy, right? Or getting your panties in a knot, or you throw like a girl, thinking that was supposed to be some powerful, demeaning way to speak to another person. And realistically, when you think about it, what are we trying to say? Like, your story is proof positive that you have power, more than enough power than a lot of men that I know in my life, let alone the females that I know in my life. And so I think it's a testament as men that we have to understand that that just doesn't cut it anymore. That's total bullshit to be speaking that way, to reference women this way. That has nothing to do with strength or weakness. And so I think it's an important point you bring up, and you've been dealing with that your whole career, basically. And so, I just wanted to pop in there and just kind of do a bit of a rant and let the listeners know that just how impactful it is, especially if you're a guy listening to this podcast today, and even some of my female listeners, some of the journey that they may have been experiencing of similar to what you've had to deal with, and how we need to change our mindsets and mindsets of real positive, positive thing to be said today. That like to talk about positive mindset or a growth mindset, but really you're dealing with the core behind that, and that's really about resilience. So tell us a little bit more about like the next phase of some of the challenges you faced in your life.
So yeah, if I can just touch on quickly, sure. The whole developing that resilient mindset and balancing yourself out. So we really respond to threats in our environment, and that's a lot of times where stuff like that comes from. So stuff like chauvinism or comments or dragging somebody down or stereotyping, really it comes from a feeling of being threatened. But what balancing yourself out and building your resilience does for you is it brings you to a level where you've got that compassionate latitude, where you take a look at any person in your life and you say, geez, you know what, there's light inside that person. No matter how shitty he's treating me right now, I know that there's light inside that person, and he's just feeling threatened, or he or she is feeling threatened. Yeah. But it's hard to get to that place through that feeling of threat, but it's something that we have power and control over. So really, I mean, again, I didn't factor my gender into things. I know in my heart that I'm a worthy contributor, and I go for what I think is right, and I work for the greater good of all involved in mind. That is how I lead. That part of knowing how I lead, my core values, what makes me up, what lights me up, inside. It's when I let those things shine through that I'm able to serve the greater good of all involved. Right. And I've always sort of led with the greater good of all involved in mind. It's not just me in a situation, it's everyone. And how do we make this situation better for all? Where we tie my personality in, the difficulties with my personality is the relationship piece. So, I don't make a lot of friends, but I have very good friends that I do make, very, very good friends. But to be really effective and serve the greater good of all involved, I need to be able to touch a lot of people in my life, inspire a lot of people. At the heart of me, I'm really a protector of people. So as long as I can remember, I've been very genuinely concerned with the well-being of others. If it was a kid getting beat up on the playground, I would go and help that person out and do it pretty diplomatically, not just throw fists. Right. And so because in my heart, I'm like, I can be a bigger person in this situation and we can smooth this out. Right. And so that really lights me up, when I feel that people aren't being treated properly or they're being taken advantage of, or if you're just on my team, you're on my team, I got your back. And that's just what's inside of me. And so I don't have to know you to care about you. And I've used my care for others to get me through, some of the toughest challenges in my life. And it's caring for others that taught me how to care for myself. And that's part of resilience, is first caring for yourself so that you can show up for others. Right on. So that's one of the most valuable lessons that I've ever learned. And one example I can bring out for you is that when I got into depot, when I got into the RCMP, you spend 6 months in depot, which is in Regina, Saskatchewan. And so when I got there, you're put together with 32 other people. And in the beginning, you're trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to get this done? Here's the parameters. We need to volunteer. Someone's got to be what's called the right marker. And so I was like, I'm kind of a leader. So I said, here's me. I gave him my pedigree. I said, I skate on a men's hockey team, and they made me captain. And so I said, I brought all of that out, and they're like, all right, you're it. And so they voted me in. And what right marker is basically I was responsible for troop movement around base and liaison with the facilitators and the staff, and marching. So I was the person on the side, calling marching orders. And so if that person doesn't get it right, everybody looks like a goof, right? So lots of pressure, really. I'd never marched before. I mean, that's a whole different thing. I could barely dance, for God's sakes. So depot was a tough challenge, and it's designed that way. And then I added 32 troop mates. I had responsibility for them onto my plate, right? And this is just part of me caring for others, right? And me being a leader. But at the same time, here I am drawing down more energy in my resilience. So depot, yeah, tough challenge. It's designed to test your mettle, and I love stuff like that. But when I got in, one of the things that really pissed me off is that, they had lowered standards for women. So in physical training, they had lower amounts of weights that we were to use. And to me, I'm like, no, that doesn't work for me. If I'm here, I'm going to be here and go all in. And so I used the men's weights. I held the record in chin-ups until, a 90-pound woman came and smoked me. I couldn't believe it. So, I mean, there is power and light within everyone, right? I never thought that someone who's smaller than me was going to be able to beat me. So it's a lesson for all. But anyways, so through Depot, I really had to prove that I could do the job, and I had my troop mates' backs. So when it came to things like fighting, I was all in. I loved fighting. I always had like play fighting, and they're doing research now how important rough play is for the development of human beings. That, you know, it comes from studying all kinds of different species, and they're really understanding now how important that is for human beings. So, but that was a skill set that I already had. I was pretty good at fighting. My poor brother, he got the beats lots. So, but anyways, like I'm 5'2", and back then I weighed 127 pounds, which was my biggest. You know, I put on 5 pounds of muscle in Depot, which I was super proud of. You know, and other guys are like 130 pounds. You know, you're puny. So, yeah. But anyways, so it was important to me that especially the guys knew that I was good at this stuff and I had their back. And one of the comments that gave me just this much needed sense of acceptance in my life came from a group of guys. And it was where they were sitting around discussing fighting. And one of my other female troopmates was there, and they said, one of the guys piped up and he said, if I get a fight, I want Inkster there. And then the other ones were like, they agreed. They were like, yeah, because she gets it. And, you know, to me, that was like, oh, there was this huge, like, weight lifted off my shoulder that these guys knew I had their back. You know, I'm there for them. I'm there for myself, because if I can't keep myself safe in a situation, I can't keep them safe. I can't keep the public safe. And so that was huge for me. That was a big point in my life. And it really, my efforts to make sure that everyone got around Depot, you know, that the whole troop was very successful. Like literally, I made sure every single person got up the ropes, got over the obstacles. If somebody needed help studying something, I was there to help study with them. It grew me as a person, but it also added to the success of my troop. And when I graduated, I was voted in to receive an honor called the Comradeship Award. And at the time, I was like, oh, you know what? That's awesome. Thank you. But it never really hit home with me how important that was until I was in a better place of receiving and understanding really what that meant. So my troop found value in my efforts, which is where that creates psychological safety. You know, someone recognizes your value and tells you that. So
yeah, you know, that's such a great point. I the journey you're taking us on right now is just so incredible, and I just want to kind of try to tie some things together here. This whole time up to this point in your life, you've been giving everything, whether it's to prove yourself or this, you know, to be there for other people. You're just giving everything. And then at this critical moment in your life, now you're given a compliment and you're being asked to receive, you know, to receive that. And so it's a different feeling now. Right now it's coming in where it's coming to you as opposed to you pushing it out in the other direction. So, you know, tell us a little bit about how that shift now has changed and altered your life.
So finally, when you're recognized for, you know, your skills and abilities, that's one of those things that lights a person up inside and helps you renew the energy. So yeah, I mean, expending tons of energy, you know, to be heard in life, I guess, to show up and to say, hey, I'm here. Here's what I can do for the greater good of all involved. If you're not careful, you'll burn a ton of energy, you know, trying to be that person, trying to please everyone. And when you start doing the inner work that you need to do, you really start to realize that takes a toll on your resilience. And so if you allow yourself to get sick, you can't serve the others in your life that need you, right? Everyone has people close to them. Everyone has you know, comrades or colleagues that they work with, and your life's energy, the power of you, is reflected into that group's ability to accomplish things. Like it could be your family, right? So if you don't take care of yourself, your family suffers, right? And so And so that's exactly what happened is that I was starting to see where my resilience was slipping, although still not aware of how stress affects the body and all that good stuff that we're going to get into. But so, it's things like when I tore my ACL that took me out of hockey, I was devastated, because hockey was what I had. Athletics was what I had in my life that lit me up. Right. All of a sudden, I didn't have that anymore. And so my resilience began slipping. And I started to really fall into things like depression quite easily, to be very pessimistic about my ability to heal that injury and get back into hockey, get back into things I love. And it also started affecting my family because I was a pretty grumpy person, right? Mm-hmm. I grew up in a family where 3 out of 5 members older than me, my parents and my older sibling, had been diagnosed with depression. And so the prevailing mindset that I grew up in, the environment, was more of a lack and limitation environment than it was an abundant one, a powerful and abundant mindset. And it's not they didn't do that on purpose, but it's how they grew up. Our environment affects how our brains are developed, how our minds are developed, and how our behaviors show up. And then our behaviors, again, affect our environment. So it was the environments that they grew up in that affected how I was raised. Absolutely. And so as a family member, as a person who, has kids or something, that's something that's so important to understand, is that our behaviors affect our environment, and that environment shapes who we are. And so, I guess, how we can sort of tie all that back into where I felt my resilience slipping was that each role I took on took a little bit more out of me. And so when I talk about being into the RCMP, that's where I first learned that how fast resilience can slip and how devastating burnout can be to a person's vitality, to their resilience, and to their perceptions on life. Yeah. And so what's really not well understood with emergency work is that environmental piece, how much the environment affects our behaviors and how much it feeds into it. Yeah. So by being able to maintain your resilience, you're able to maintain your ability to show up to the best of your abilities in those environments, and then recover when you're not in them anymore, recover when you get out of them. And so, going into the RCMP, I thought I had a good head on my shoulders and I could serve the greater good by serving my country in that capacity. But being a big picture thinker with my personality the way it was, the stuff I was dealing with was not working on that big picture approach. And that burnt up a lot of energy for me. I would be really ticked off about all the reoccurring stuff that's about, people putting themselves in bad situations. And I just really thought, I'm spending a lot of time and energy here on things that aren't making a difference. And that wore me right out. And also the stress that comes along with those jobs, adds to all of that. And so by stress, I mean like your physical safety, the fact that, the detachment I was posted to was quite small, but had a big, very busy detachment area. So I was a senior member on shift after 6 months of service where I was, which meant that I was responsible for my partner who had 6 months less service than I did. And I knew that at the time because when I was working in the quarry, I had become a safety rep, and I started to learn about safety, and that anyone having the authority to direct the work of others is liable for that work, is liable for what happens to that person. And so I knew this in the back of my mind, right? So I was disgruntled. I was burning up a lot of energy about being a leader. I was still learning at an accelerated pace. I mean, God, 6 months in, and I was dealing with murder. I was dealing with, suicide, violent sexual assaults, all these kinds of things that on their own are very draining situations, especially when you grow up not in that environment. Yeah. So it's all new to me. All of it is new. I have nothing to match and to make references with in my brain to feel comfortable with those situations. And I mean, big dive in resilience, dive in perception of life. I mean, and then my behavior started to change where I was questioning my ability to serve the greater good. I, honest to God, wanted to fight with people more than I wanted to talk them into my car. I was so sick and tired of it that I just would rather fight, get into my car so I can go deal with the next one, and didn't care how it affected that person, that group, whoever, right? So very unaware of the situation and unaware of how that stress was affecting me.
That's a great point there, Sharon. But I think, you've been all of it through this time. You're talking about how you've been able to build resilience. Now you're in these stages where you're starting to, resilience is draining, and it's really taking us now to that next step. You've touched on it a little bit, but I'd really like you to get into the stress side of resilience and how that, and the things that you've learned and how we can do a better job at managing our stress. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that part of resilience?
Yeah. So the key thing about stress is that it affects all aspects of our behavior. So our ability to perceive the life events, the environmental stimulus that's around us, to feel emotional response, because you can really numb that out, and that's a part of stress. To be able to focus, to learn, to reason through situations, and to perform at our best. So, and what's woven into all of those aspects is our ability to make effective decisions. And so by understanding how stress affects the body, we're able to be more aware of when we need to regulate our energy expenditure and sort of balance ourselves out so that we can remain resilient. So we burn less energy. We burn less of that internal energy that we have, right? So a lot of times, our energy expenditure is running below the radar, and it could be just the fact that we're frustrated so many times throughout our day, and that's just zapping our energy. Whereas if we are thinking about something that we're appreciating, in our life, that's actually helping us build up our energy. So at the cellular level in our body, our cells are either preparing for fight, flight, or freeze, right? And it could be just something like frustration is a getting into fight. Or at the cellular level, we're renewing our energy. And so we're renewing our resilience to life's challenges, to our immunity is tied to that, right? So being immune to disease. And so what ends up happening is you burn so much energy that you start getting sick. And that's exactly what happened to me. So in the RCMP, I started getting sick. I started losing muscle mass and hair. And it wasn't until that point that I said, okay, it took that long for me to say, I got to get out of here before somebody gets hurt.
Right.
And then later on in my career as a safety professional, I was working at this mine that had some just amazing complex environmental engineering risks. And, again, here I am learning something at an accelerated pace. I was learning and trying to understand rock mechanics, and so that we could get a good grasp of what was happening in that mine. And as the risk levels were elevating, the people around me, their behaviors were starting to change. They were getting squirrely, right? It was a lot of try to survive stuff going on. And so what popped out of that is again, sexism, bullying, harassment. And with me and my big picture approach saying, no, we can fix this. Let's just dig into some details here. Yeah. Push that elephant into the middle of the room. Let's cut it apart piece by piece, examine and see how we can fix it, right? Where people around me were not wanting to do that. Let's hide this, let's push it under the rug, and let's get going because shareholder value is important for us, right? So again, as I'm burning tons of energy for what I think is working towards the greater good of all involved, I'm tearing down my own resilience, because what ended up happening without me knowing it is that I thought resilience was really, I thought, you keep up your health by eating healthy and exercising. I thought that's how you manage stress. Okay. Right. And it turned out there's much more to managing stress than that. Right. Because a lot of it was about how much energy I burnt up and didn't renew. So when it came to, down to crunch, I would spend more time at work. I would decide not to exercise. I'd eat crappy food, right? Because I wasn't at home cooking good stuff. I was eating processed stuff. And that, again, started to chew away at my resilience, because now I only had, I had none of the domains of resilience covered anymore. I was really starting to get sick. And so, long story very short, I blew the whistle on what was happening at the mine, all the bullying and the corruption and all that stuff, because it wasn't just me that it was happening to. It was the entire site, and which made things much better for the site. Things got cleaned up there. Leadership started to take hold of things, but it tore the heck out of me, and I ended up getting sick again. And so this time, I finally went to the doctor after losing weight again and muscle mass. And, I said, what's going on? And the doc's like, well, you're depressed, Sharon. And I thought, oh man, kiss of death, right? Because I grew up in a family full of depression.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that, 80% of primary care doctor visits are a result of stress, yet only 3% of patients ever receive any stress management help. Okay. And so that's key. Yeah. So a lot of times what happens is, you're given some medication, given some time off and told to come back. So in my case, I said no to the medication because I'd been around my whole life, three people in my life that were, creating my environment when I grew up had been bouncing on and off medication. I'd seen what it did, and it never worked for them. Not to the capacity that it made a huge difference in their depression. And so, what I knew intuitively, again, is that I had to change the way I thought about things, because what I was doing was focusing on problems. I was focusing on, okay, there's a problem, let's fix it. There's a problem, let's fix it. And all I was getting was more problems. So you get what you focus on in life, which is a huge, a huge learning curve. So
yeah, no kidding. That's a great point. I was just going to say that. I think, we forget how simple it is that where we put our energy in life is what we end up by getting more of. And if we really look at at how happy we are at the different parts of our life, we can see quite quickly where we're getting more of what we want or more of what we don't want. Yeah. And so it's a huge awareness to have there. So I like that you've started to touch on energy. We've gone from resilience to stress. Now you're getting into the energy part, and this has really started the foundation really of getting into HeartMath. And so tell us a little bit more about your work with HeartMath.
So I got into HeartMath by studying something called the Brain Fitness Program. And I got there from studying focus, because what I started to do was I had this aha moment that I needed to do some inner work in order to think about things differently. And so I started meditating. I read books on meditation. I wrote Daniel Goleman's work on altered traits from meditating. It really does change your brain. So I got into rewiring the brain, and I thought, okay, this is great. And so at the same time I'm studying the Brain Fitness Program, my father, one of those people who I grew up with who had depression, he phones me up one day and he says, this is post-heart attack. Says, my doctor got me into a program. It's called HeartMath. And I thought, whoa, okay, tell me about it. And when he was telling me about it, he was excited. And I thought, this is amazing, because one thing, I guess, that's really hard when you're with people who have depression is it's really hard to keep that conversation light and happy and flowing, because it generally dives towards something that really takes the energy out of the interaction, and you just don't want to be in it anymore. It's really hard. Mm-hmm. And so, but here he is, he's saying, oh, I've got this great program and it really hit home with me and I feel great. And I'm like, whoa, okay, something to this. So that's how I got into HeartMath. I saw the change in my father, and I thought, okay, so if I can dig into this and learn some skills here on resilience, because that's what HeartMath is, not only am I going to be able to help myself, but when I started doing the inner work, I knew that self-care relates to care for those around you. And I thought, okay, maybe this is how I can help my family, because my whole life I've been searching for ways to understand depression, to understand how come they don't bounce back, because I've gone through all these challenges, but when I bounce back, I become a bigger person, right? And but for some reason they weren't, and it really has to do with the wiring in our brain. So HeartMath, it really gave me the hope, and that things like depression can be transformed. The knowledge that I didn't have to be a victim of my DNA or my environment, which I grew up in. And it really has given me the power to improve my resilience and that of my families through influence. And I serve the world in HeartMath now as a certified trainer.
Right on. That's such an amazing journey, Sharon, that you've taken us through. And I think it's so important that we think about the takeaways of what you've been through. And it's been, like we talked about earlier, a really crappy hand dealt with. And you used intuition. You started to understand a little bit more. And now you're a certified HeartMath trainer. And I'm wondering if you can take us through a little bit about, exactly what HeartMath is, and maybe even a practice that our listeners can take away with them.
Sure. So we'll start with the term resilience. A HeartMath definition of resilience is really the ability to prepare for, adapt to, and recover from stress, challenge, and adversity. So our resilience affects our ability to communicate effectively with the people in our lives because the stress affects all aspects of our behavior. So maintaining our calm communicates to the people around us, that we feel the situation is safe, whatever it is. And the situation can be easily resolved for the highest good of all involved, and all is well, we're all safe. And when you are able to communicate that, not only verbally, but through your behaviors, through your actions, because 56% of communication comes across in nonverbal communication, non-words, right? No words. That's how you're able to communicate to those around you. And so it's really important to understand that it's so much about that capacity.
So why is resilience so important today then?
Right. Well, 1 in 5 Canadians these days will suffer from a mental health challenge. 1 in 5.
Wow.
And right now, if you look at what the Mental Health Commission of Canada and the Occupational Health and Safety Canadian Center, right now, mental health challenges, aside from COVID, which has just exacerbated all of this, is they're the number one cause of disability in Canada. Number one cause. So our economy spends $51 billion a year, working on this, and $20 billion of that is related to work-related causes. And so, does industry play a role in this? Yes, it does. Does leadership play a role? Absolutely, right? Right now, 47% of Canadians feel that work is the most stressful part of their day, and it affects the mid-career workers the most. And so why do you think that is? Why do you think it's the mid-career workers that are hit hardest?
I would suggest that by mid-career, you've got a full plate, right? You've got you're married, you've got the kids, you've got mortgage. Maybe your kids are at a point they're going to university. You're balancing that, and maybe at this point in your career, you're also thinking, or in life, you're thinking that is this really the career I want to be in? So I would think, as those would be some of the things that would cause that issue.
Absolutely. And so you can see that, again, those challenges are calling for energy expenditure, right? And that's really what it's about.
No kidding. So I just wanted to make a note there, and I love that you brought up the stats. And one of the things in doing the men's work that I do is that suicide is the second leading cause of death for men between the age of 15 and 39, and it's third for the next age group, so 40 to 49, and it's fourth, I should say, for 45 to 54. So, when you think about how staggering those numbers are, and then we're trying to deal with things like stress and building up our resilience. It's why I felt this topic today was so important, that we need to get this message out so that not just men, but women as well, all of us can learn how to better regulate ourselves and with stress. And so, tell us a little bit more on how we can use resilience to help us cope better with our life's challenges.
Sure. Yeah. And so one thing to keep in mind is that statistics are only those things that we know about. And so what's underneath all of that is much greater, right? Like I'd said before in the RCMP, I wasn't going to ask for help because, I'd worked so hard to get in there. I was already a female, which was sort of a knock against my abilities at the time. And I wasn't going to be one to go on stress leave. So statistics are only what we know about. So the problem is really much, much greater than that. And so our power really comes from the ability to understand that we can control our physiology. We can control all of the systems and subsystems that are keeping us alive and healthy. And so that ability is facilitated by understanding the science behind how stress affects our bodies, how stress affects our physiology. And so by practicing a skill set like the HeartMath techniques, we can actually improve and maintain a healthy baseline physiological response to the challenges in our environment.
Cool. So how does self-regulation come into the picture then with HeartMath?
So self-regulation is our ability to monitor and manage our responses to the environmental stimulus. By doing so, we're able to control the physiology and balance out what's called our autonomic nervous system in our body. And that system is responsible for 90% of our body's internal functions, okay? So this is breathing, digestion, heart rate, our immune system, important aspects of our hormonal system, alertness, and sleep. So it's a pretty big key player in how we survive.
Wow. So really what you're saying is about learning for us to learn how to get out of our own way, right?
Oh, yes,
That's what we did.
absolutely.
Right
Yeah.
on. So how do we do that? So how does Alan get out of his own way?
Yes. So self-regulation, self-regulation, a practiced self-regulation. So anything worth doing in life generally takes a bit of work, and changing the internal wiring of your physiology is just that. It does take work because you've been wired unknowingly, unaware by all of the events in your life and by the environment that you've been in. So that's wiring our responses to things. Okay. And so, one of my favorite benefits of practicing the HeartMath techniques, one of the things that I found to be most beneficial in my life is that, when I balance myself out, I have greater clarity of thought. I can focus on things again. Because when I was in my most stressed out state, I thought I was losing my mind. I couldn't focus on anything, and my dyslexia symptoms were back, and just it was unbelievable. And that just brings you further down, all that concern and worry about your own health, right?
Yeah.
So having the ability to self-regulate also means that we've got greater access to our intuitive intelligence. We actually listen to it. It's always there, no matter what it is for you. But there's always something telling you and pushing you in the right direction, right? It's inside of all of us. But a lot of times when you're in a stressed out state, you don't pay attention to it at all. And usually after you've gone through something, you've reacted to a situation, you probably or likely made it worse. You go back in time, once your autonomic nervous system is balanced back out, you go, oh my God, I can't believe I did that, right? I really should not have said that. So, but you're not able to have access to that intuitive intelligence when you're stressed out.
Fair enough. And so you touched on a little bit also, you're starting to talk about intuition, but there's also a heart. Our heart has intuition as well. And so explain that a little bit to our listener, what that's all about.
Yeah, this is the part that really excites me because I get a bit geeky about the science. So research in neurocardiology, and we're studying the neural pathways in the heart, has really brought light to the fact that we have a heart or a brain in our heart, and it's called the intrinsic cardiac nervous system, and it can function completely independently of the brain and the head. And so if you think about it, people, when they do a heart transplant, when they take the heart out, it's still beating, right?
Yeah.
And you're thinking, how is that still beating? It's because of the heart brain. And so the heart brain can actually feel, sense, learn, and remember things. It's got over 40,000 neurons inside. And so the neat thing is that this research they've done as far back as the 1800s. At that point, they knew that the heart sent more information to the brain than the brain sent to the heart. And that's key, because research was really focused on the brain, thinking that there was a lot more top-down functioning going on. That's not the case. Not the case at all. And so our heart, because of that communication pathway, our heart plays a huge role in the performance of our brain.
Wow, that's crazy. You wouldn't have thought that before, right? I remember in my journey, read tons of stuff about intuition and mental side of the game, but not really understanding how the impact our heart plays. And so we talked a lot about stress earlier on. So tell us how HeartMath can really help us with managing our stress.
So being able to manage the stress, again, it's that capacity to manage those challenges, and that's our resilience. So a greater resilience means that we've got more capacity to manage those challenges in our life. So we start just to use less energy and often avoid many of the situations that we have to bounce back from. So just by being smarter about how we function in life. So when our ability to make effective decisions is improved, and we can communicate those decisions clearly and decisively, we spend a lot less time doing damage control. Right?
Kind of sounds like this topic, this word now that's simply getting more and more popular, this coherence thing. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about, describe a little bit to us what this coherence is all about. Because that's a big part of HeartMath, isn't it?
Very big part of HeartMath, yes. So coherence is an optimal state for the body in which the mind, emotions, and heart are aligned and in sync. So the intuitive guidance from your heart, the functioning of your mind, and your emotional responses are really in a state of energetic coherence, energetic coordination, really. So physiologically speaking, our immune, hormonal, and nervous systems are functioning in a state of energetic coordination. And that energy efficient state allows the body to utilize the energy that we have at the cellular level to renew. And so we have to think of it sort of like a balance scale. So we need to be able to balance out that energy renewal with the energy expenditure that we have in our life. But it takes being aware of how this is happening in the body, and then practicing the skills to be able to renew that energy quickly. So you don't have to go for a nap to renew energy or to rebuild on the cellular level. There's techniques you can use.
Cool. I like the nap idea though. That's all right.
Yeah.
So, cool. So I was, in preparing for our talk today, and what some of the research I was coming across, it talked about these 4 domains of resilience, and I just thought you could share with us what the 4 domains are and a little bit about what they're all about.
Absolutely. So the 4 domains for me was a big aha moment, because it really brought light into the area of work I needed to do in my life to get back into balance and to be coherent. So there's 4 domains of resilience, really, and it's the mental domain. So we've got mental flexibility. We're able to learn things, respond to our situations by thinking through and learning new things. And then we've also got the physical domain. And so that's your strength, your flexibility. We've got flexibility as well, right? Your strength, your aerobic capacity. And so you can build up the capacity in the physical domain by exercise. We can build up the capacity in our mental domain by learning new things, right? And then we've got the spiritual domain, which, can mean different things to a lot of people. And it could just mean your core set of values and beliefs. And when you get to do inner work, you start to understand, okay, what are my core values and beliefs? And when you find you start lining up with those things, you burn less energy. And then we've got the emotional domain, which is really important. In HeartMath, we focus on the mental, we build capacity in the mental and the emotional domains. And it's in the emotional domain that we tend to expend the most energy without being aware of it. We're not aware that we do this. And so that awareness really helps us spend less energy.
Wow, that's awesome. So how do we go about implementing resilience in our life today?
So what I've learned through a lot of self-reflection, a lot of personal development work, a lot of that coherence training that I've been doing is that it takes practice. It takes time. And so with a dedicated practice, we've got the ability to change our baseline physiological responses to stress. So by doing so, we experience, sustained behavioral change, which affects our environment, affects those around us. And we're really taking advantage of our brain's neuroplasticity. So we can learn new skills, we can self-regulate emotionally. And what we're doing is rewiring our brains for better health. But again, it takes work because, for 40 years, you've been firing and wiring neurons that fire together, wire together. You've probably heard that. You've been firing and wiring a certain way, and that becomes your baseline it's like your baseline mode of operation. And now we're changing it through practice.
Very cool. So can you share a technique then for our listeners today that they can use to get started, at least on the path of having some resiliency built up?
Absolutely. And so I'm hoping you're going to, follow along with me. We'll do it together. Cool. So we're going to learn a technique called the quick coherence technique. And it's really designed to build coherence, maintain our composure, regulate energy, and increase our resilience capacity if we practice it. So what you'll notice is you can use this technique on the go, no matter where you are, what you're doing, eyes open, eyes closed, driving your car, sitting at your desk. Okay, and so that's part of what HeartMath techniques are about, is that they're really easy to use and very effective. So what we'll do, we'll do the technique and just got to follow along, and then I'll explain why we do the things we do in the technique at the end. Okay, so we're probably going to take about maybe 2 minutes. It might feel awkward, but it's part of the process, right? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to begin by focusing our attention in the area of our heart. And we're going to imagine our breath is flowing in and out of our heart or chest area. So right where our heart is. And we're going to breathe a little slower and deeper than usual. So what you might want to do is try at a pace of about 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, or whatever's really comfortable for you. We're going to do that for about maybe a minute. And then what we're going to do after is activate our renewing feeling. And so by activating your near feeling, that's really going to help us increase the coherence between the heart and the brain. And it helps us maintain that coherent level. And so when we're in coherence, again, that's an optimal functioning state for our bodies.
Cool.
All right. So you ready?
Ready.
Okay. So we're going to begin by focusing our attention on the area of our heart. And imagine that our breath is flowing in and out of our heart or chest area, breathing a little slower and deeper than usual. And if you find your mind wandering, just gently bring it back to the area of your heart. Okay, now what I'd like you to do is make it a sincere attempt to experience a positive feeling or a regenerative feeling like care or appreciation for something or someone in your life. Okay, so that's about 2 minutes of the quick coherence technique. So just tell me a little bit about how you feel.
Oh, I feel pretty relaxed, actually. It was nice to just dial down and just focus on that. I have a clock in the office here. I don't know if you could hear it during the silent period, but it would really help me get into rhythm as well to the whole process. Yeah, I feel I was outstanding.
Good, right. So that's very typical of what you feel. And so if you think back about it, that took 2 minutes for us to renew energy. That took 2 minutes to get into a coherent state, basically. When you start to practice, you can get there much quicker. And what I'd recommend is that if you could practice that for about 5 minutes, that would be a good place to start. Because about 5 minutes of quick coherence really will you'll start to feel the shift in your body. You'll start to feel the feeling of coherence. And it's a lot like the state of flow. If you can think of the state of flow. So whenever you basically lose track of time or with something that you really love doing, and you're just like, you just feel terrific. For me, that's catwalking out of the corner on my dirt bike. I can just bring back to that feeling, and that's it for me. It's like, boom. Oh yes. And what happens is that when you focus on that feeling while you're doing your heart focused breathing, that's shifting your heart into a coherent state and getting your brain involved. It's getting your brain into that, entrained in the communication process, we'll say. So yeah, the reason we focus on the area of our heart in that case is that researchers can tell that when you focus on a specific area of the body, physiological changes in that body, in that area. So a lot like if you're in the gym and, doing your bicep reps, if you're staring at the TV and just knocking off the reps, you're going to have less gains than if you're actually focused on getting your posture right, activating the muscle, and quality over quantity type of thing. So that's really what's happening.
Cool. This was such an amazing time today. Thank you so much, Sharon, for your story, enlightening us on the path. Very, very powerful, and giving us this outstanding quick technique, or this quick coherence technique that our listeners can take away with them. But there's so much more involved to HeartMath and the work that you do. And so how could our listeners get a hold of you, reach out, and learn more about the HeartMath techniques, and really get a real good grip on managing resilience and stress in their life? How would they do that?
Yeah, so I've got a pretty good online presence now. You can just simply search for me. If you jump into LinkedIn, I've got a LinkedIn page, and I've got my company page on that as well, where I post, a little bit of the science, a little bit of the information behind HeartMath and what it's about, how it can improve your life. So LinkedIn, I've got a Twitter account that I just started. So my company's name is Practical Safety, Health, and Environmental Solutions. Okay. And so my Twitter handle's at PSHES. So I'm not too up on Twitter yet. I just started it, but I'm starting to gain a little momentum there. And again, I've got a website where I've got lots of cool links to free resources on the HeartMath side of things. I've got links to the HeartMath websites themselves. And we also HeartMath has a technology called the Inner Balance Trainer that I can get you hooked up with. And so by being able to measure your progress, it helps you along in your training program. And that's basically what the trainer does.
Outstanding. Well, that's just perfect. Outstanding. Really good to hear. I'll have all of this all your contact information in the podcast notes. It'll also be uploaded on my website and onto Anchor. So look for that, Anchor FM. That is. So look for that in the coming time here, a few days. Sharon, you brought so much value today. I'm just so grateful for this time that we've spent together. As I said earlier, your story is just amazing. And gentlemen, we've learned today what it takes to manage stress, and how critical it is for us when we learn how to build our resilience and manage stress, so we can live a life of purpose, on purpose. So thank you so much, Sharon, for joining us today. Have a great day, and look forward to having you back on the podcast sometime soon.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Elaine, and good luck with everyone and on your missions.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Evolving Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.